boldly engaging the mindless propaganda of our time, apparently with reason. This is Rage of the Age.
All right, this is Rage of the Age, and today I have here a representative from Reboot Recovery, which works with veterans working through things with suicide, trying to take the curb off of what's happening with many veterans, those who are still in the service, and even with first responders that they work with. I have with me here today Brian Flannery, who is a representative who's going to talk about the work they do and how we can help veterans connect and get on the path to where they can start finding recovery and a sense to their life in which to go from where they're at, because for many, where they're at now just isn't working, and they need something that they can step into to just break whatever hold there is on them, that they can move on to a more fulfilling life. So I want to introduce to you today and welcome Brian Flannery. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I have to ask, and of course, you're not the original founder, but you are definitely working with the organization now. What sparked the desire to launch something like Reboot Recovery, considering there's other avenues, if you will, out there that a veteran may pursue? Why was there a need or a desire to launch this program?
Yeah, so the desire, it all stemmed with Evan and Jenny Owens. So back in 2010 and 11, Evan Owens was our founder and executive director, was a businessman in Nashville, Tennessee, working his way up the corporate chain, and worked himself to be a CEO in Nashville. And I mean, his accolades are crazy in the business world. He was Nashville's top 30 under 30, 35 under 35, and all these. He was really succeeding in business. And at the time, his wife, who was a doctor of occupational therapy, worked on post at the traumatic brain injury clinic. And so as she's seeing her patients, all these guys are coming in and they're asking her questions like, is it possible for your soul to die? I feel like a part of me was left in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever it may have been, Somalia, all those things. And so she would come home and she'd have these conversations with Evan just about what she witnessed. And they were talking to some other friends, and somebody sent him a book called The Combat Trauma Healing Manual by Chris Adsit. And so they were leaving. He's actually from Cincinnati, Ohio. So they were leaving from Nashville up to Ohio on a road trip, and they just started reading through this book, and the weight of everything that her patients were seeing just was overwhelming. And so they just started praying, like, how can we make a difference? How can you use us? Now, remember, this is two civilians.
Okay.
And the general consensus around the military community is that if you're not or haven't been military, you can't help the military.
Yeah.
And so outside of like physical. And so they started inviting people over to their house and just walking through this book with them because they were living in Clarksville, outside of Clarksville. And they started walking through this book with these people, and a retired chaplain from Fort Campbell that was running the Soldier Family Assistance Center, the SFAC, at the Warrior Transition Battalion, reached out to him and said, hey, I heard about what you guys are doing in your house. What's the name of your program? And Evan joked and said, it's called Evan and Jenny's Living Room on Monday night. And so he said, well, hey, why don't you bring it to post? I'll give you the space. I'll provide childcare. I'll take care of everything. You guys just come and do what you're doing. And so they went on posts and provided a meal and started walking through spiritual wounds of trauma with veterans. And from there, it kind of grew. I got involved when it was there at Fort Campbell, and then it grew from one group to three, from 3 to 12, from 12 to 30, then from 30 to almost 300 now.
Wow. I remember seeing a promotional video on Facebook about this, and I believe the man's name was Brad. He was on there explaining the first meeting they had. It was like three couples showed up, and they
Yeah,
were like thrilled, like, wow, three people actually showed up to this thing. And I can definitely understand that feeling, having been you try something grand and like maybe one shows up and you feel like it was a failure, but they were like, wow, we had three couples, this is great. And of course others might look at that and go, oh well, only three couples, but they were
right.
just happy. Wow,
Yeah,
there's at least somebody's going to participate in this. But it went from that to something much bigger. It grew on the post, like you said, and,
yeah,
and now you've touched other parts of the country. I'm assuming other parts of the world now with military
correct.
bases abroad.
Well,
Um,
not just our own military. There's groups
oh wow,
In the Czech Republic that are being led by uh, Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia. No, what's that? Czechoslovakia. That's it. Wow, that was tough for me. I have TBI. Clearly,
yes, yeah,
um, I can't believe that was so tough. Anyway, we have groups. We have groups there that are being led to their military by
uh-huh.
their military. Um,
Wow,
we have groups in the UK. We have groups in Ireland. We have groups in Korea, Australia. Um, we had a group for a while that was meeting in Iraq, and so
mhm. Wow, that's pretty. And it went from just that small group out of, like you said, it was a joke in their living room, and the
yeah,
next thing you know, this has grown. I guess the question that weighs on my mind, being a veteran of some time, and you're a veteran as well.
yeah,
Many veterans have this mentality. You kind of mentioned there's this feeling that civilians really can't help us. Most of us don't even think they care.
right,
But there's all these programs out there wanting to help veterans, or of course there's the VA, which there's a uh, let's just say an active distrust amongst many veterans to even go. And having been involved with that, I don't blame their concern with the VA. But it's like, of all places to go, a lot have turned to this program.
yeah,
Which, it didn't come from top down. This wasn't like something the Army dreamed up. It wasn't like a panel of psychologists or counselors or
right.
whatever. No physicians were involved. This was just people who just wanted to do something. What do you think is
Yeah.
different about this program compared to all the other programs out there?
Yeah, great question. And so Reboot was designed based off the fact that there's 4,502 last time I checked religions in this world.
Mhm.
That's a lot of religions, right?
Yes.
But every one of them agrees on one thing, that the human being consists of a mind, a body, and a soul.
Mhm.
If I go to Afghanistan and I take a round in the shoulder, nobody questions a physical wound. Nobody
Mhm.
questions a mental wound, but nobody's really addressing the spiritual wound of that injury. And what's amazing about that is, yes, we have chaplains, and I am not in any way bashing a chaplain, but one chaplain can have 500 soldiers underneath him.
Mhm.
That's a that's a lot of people to be responsible for spiritual roots. That's a
Right.
lot of people to try to help by yourself. Um, at the same time, we're peer led, meaning you kind of hinted at it a minute ago. We're not a DoD. We're not a Department of Defense group. We're not a Department of the Army group. We're not an Army program. We are
Mhm.
a nonprofit, uh, and we're not led by clinicians and doctors that have. We're led by everyday people who have experienced trauma in their life, have are at least on a journey of recovery, and just want to help other people get from where they once were to where they are now. You know, um,
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because I know by the time I got out of the Army in 2012, there was already this tension uh, with what you could say or do in the Army that I'd never seen before. 20 years of service, I've never witnessed up to that point the concern of what your words are. And even there was even concerns about what a chaplain could even say or do, even talking about religion.
Right.
And that's their field. And
Right.
it's almost as if it was a government perspective of, we're not even going to bother to worry about anything spiritual or the soul within the soldier itself. It's straight up, get your mind straight, be physically fit, and we have no other concern. And so this approach does look a little, I'll say it is different
Yeah.
from what I would have found in the Army, from what the VA, the
Yeah.
VA would be very reluctant to include any religious aspect to it, even though they have chaplains at the hospitals waiting to, I don't know what they're supposed to do for you, but they're
Yeah.
there. Uh,
Well, and times have
so
changed. Uh,
yes,
you know, so my involvement with Reboot, very long story short, in 2010, I was with the 101st when the whole division deployed to Afghanistan together. And I was injured. And my injuries ended up being much more significant than anybody believed at the time. And so I came home and I started having, surgeries on my neck and my shoulder and my hip and my knee, and going through the TBI center and going through all this mental health and all this stuff. Well, I was raised as an atheist. And so uh, the old thing, there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole, wasn't exactly true, because even when I was
that's
in
right.
combat, I didn't believe. Before mission, when guys would stop and pray, I'd just continue doing PCCs and PCIs, making sure that I was ready to go.
Right.
And so, fast forward to 2012, I had all the surgeries, had been through all the programs, I had done all these things that everybody asked me, and the people around me kept saying things like, "This is your new normal. Get used to this." And I just got to this place of hopelessness. If there's no chance that tomorrow is going to be any better than today, then what's the point in tomorrow?
Right.
I couldn't be the husband that my wife deserved. I wasn't the father that my kids deserved. And so all those things led me to the fact where if I couldn't be the man that I'm supposed to be for them, the least thing I could do is leave them some money. And so in mid 2000 or late 2012, I moved my wife and kids back to Indiana, where she's from, under the pretenses that they were going to go and get a house and a job and set some roots and get the kids in school. And then when I got out, I would just laterally transfer over and it'd be an easier transition. When in all actuality, I knew that I was going to take my life.
Oh, wow.
Um, I had come to the decision that my wife and kids did nothing wrong. They didn't deserve to be the ones to find me. And so after I moved them up in 2012, I attempted suicide. Spoiler alert, I failed. And right after my failed suicide attempt, I ran into Evan Owens right outside the SVAC. And his wife had been my doctor at the traumatic brain injury clinic. So I knew Reboot as a Bible thumping, kumbaya singing,
Right.
hippie tree hugging group. That's what I
Wow.
assumed. That's what I assumed. It was my
Sure.
assumption. And so I was walking by and he invited me in, and I made a statement around the lines of, God's never had time for me. I don't have time for him. And I kept walking. And then Evan Owens said the two words that'll get anybody to do anything in the military: free food.
Uh,
Uh, so he invited me in for dinner. I went in and I sat down, and I noticed something right off the bat, that I was surrounded by a group of guys that were very similar to me. The only difference is they had a peace about them that I didn't have, but I so desperately desired.
right.
And the first few weeks that I was there, I sat in the back. I didn't say anything. I didn't talk. They didn't force me to. It's not like, in any way I was forced to, outside of anything in my comfort zone. They just
Right.
let me be there. And then we came to a week where we were talking about forgiveness. And uh, Evan was explaining that true forgiveness has to run through you and to others. It can't just stop at you.
Right.
And I realized that I didn't know what he was talking about, and I didn't understand what forgiveness actually meant. And so I approached him and asked if we could have coffee soon. The next morning, he met me in Clarksville. We had coffee. I asked a ton of questions. We talked for a long time. And a couple weeks later, they were talking about identity, and they started talking about how oftentimes we put our identity in the things other people that say around us. Yes. Well, around me, I was hearing that I was broken, that this is my new normal, that things will never be the same, that my best days are in my past. And so that's what I was believing. And instead, the script was flipped to, I'm not the things that I've done, but I'm the things that had been done for me.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
My identity isn't in what other people are saying. It's what he says about me. And scripture is pretty clear about what he says. The fact that before we're born, he knows how many hairs are on the top of our head. Now, for you and I, he cheated.
Yes, very easy.
We must have been, he must have been getting tired. We must have been right before the Sabbath. But so he was saying all these things, and I don't know. I had never heard the gospel presented in a way that I understood it. I had never heard half the things that were coming on in the group. And so I decided to give my life to Christ. And I told Evan, I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know what it meant, but more people needed to know about this, and I needed to help be a mouthpiece. And he said, okay. I started traveling around Post and just sharing my story of hope and peace and joy, and that it didn't come from the bottom of a bottle or a pill. And been with him ever since, leading groups and traveling around and telling my story wherever I can, because, you know, you're right. There's a ton of programs out there. And I would never be as arrogant to say that one program is the absolute answer, because if that was true, we would see a decline in the number of deaths by suicide. And the fact that it's still raising just proves the fact that not one program is going to be it for everyone.
I know that the numbers put out there often that 22 veterans take their life every day, or I believe that's the number that keeps coming up, and it's very common. And when you compare that in light of now in our day and age, we don't have the draft. It's all volunteer force. A very small percentage of the population will ever serve in the military. And then when you compare it to the numbers of veterans that just take their lives, it's absolutely astounding at how many are willing to do that.
And numbers have changed drastically.
Oh, wow.
And so I think 2 years ago is when the real big push for 22 was going out, right? And it's been going ever since. The VA, I think at the beginning of this year, put out a new number that was, I think, 24 or 23. It had gone up slightly. And if you look at the measuring fields that they chose, they didn't monitor every state. They monitored, I think, 30 states. And then my point is the real number is unknown. But 2 years ago, the government did this big media push. We need awareness. If awareness. If we have awareness, then then the solution will come forward, right? And so they dumped all this money into awareness, and the number went up. Because the problem is, today in our society, it's hard for me to believe that anybody is not aware that there is a problem with veteran suicide. You can't get on Facebook, Twitter without seeing it. It's in the papers, it's on the news, it's everywhere. The problem is awareness only gets you so far. There has to be action, right? And that's kind of what we decided long ago, that we weren't going to be about awareness. We were going to be about action. So I think that there's I don't focus on the number, right? I refuse, because my way of thinking is, even if it is 20, even if it's 15, that's still too many, right? And instead of
Right.
focusing on the number, if there's 15 a day, that means right now, as you and I are speaking, there are 15 that are contemplating or planning for tomorrow.
That's right. That's right.
So let's get a hold of those 15. Let's get a hold of the 15 that are thinking about it today, that feel like nobody cares, that feels like nobody's answering. You know, in the very beginning stages of Reboot, somebody once said, one of the veterans that came through said, I feel like I went to war while the rest of America went to the mall.
Yes.
You know,
This is Philip Sharp of Rage of the Age. I hope you're enjoying the interview so far. In fact, if you love this podcast, I want to encourage you to leave a positive review on Twitter by making your review and hashtagging it Rage of the Age now. You can also make a review on Facebook by finding our page, Rage of the Age. Go to the reviews, select yes to recommend, and then write in your review. Each week for the next 10 weeks, I intend to give away one copy of my book, Not in the Wind, Earthquake, or Fire. It is a book about a second deployment to Iraq, written from a first-hand experience and through the perspective of a combat infantryman. The book is also full of many spiritual insights. If you would like a chance to receive a copy of this book, then again, go and make a review on Twitter, hashtag it Rage of the Age now, or go to Facebook, recommend the page, and leave your review. Our winner for last week is a Doreen Hood for her review that she had posted on our Facebook page, Rage of the Age. Thank you, Doreen, for recommending this podcast to others. You can be looking for your copy of Not in the Wind, Earthquake, or Fire to be getting to you very soon.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
I just know, like, for me personally, and this probably applies to quite a few veterans, that I've known more people to commit suicide than we lost in the campaigns during the fight.
yeah,
And it breaks my heart because they would come home and you think we made it out alive. We've overcome this. Life has got to be better than what it was during
yeah,
this deployment. But then not long after, or even just a few years later, you find out, this person took their life, and it sends a shock to everybody. Because in
yeah,
our minds, the ones who are left behind were like, man, you made it through all that stuff just in your life. That just seemed like,
yeah,
that shouldn't be. And it's both sides of the, those who are still living are hurt by it as much as those who were hurting, who felt they had to take their life. So this is definitely something, this is near and dear to me. Doing
yeah,
this podcast is not like, hey, I need another guest. I mean, I
yeah,
wanted this one. I'm glad when you all reached back out to me about this, because this is important, because a lot of us it's frequent. So-and-so took
yeah.
their life, and it
That's right.
just, we're like, why?
That's right.
Why?
And when, for whatever reason it may be, because there's a ton of reasons, or there's a ton of things that change about a human being when they experience war, right? Whether it be a struggle with false guilt, which false guilt, everybody always assumes that it's survivor's guilt, right? That's the big one. But there are so many different other forms of false guilt that really eat at a man that's been to war, whether it be catch-22, having to make a decision on the fly, thinking you made the right choice, only to find out later you didn't.
Right.
Guilt of competency, right? Where if only I would have done a little bit more, if only I would have pushed a little bit harder, been a little faster, shot a little straighter, whatever it may be, then X wouldn't have happened. And so, between false guilt, lack of identity, because, I think one of the toughest days for me was the day that they handed me my blue card, handed me my discharge paperwork, and the next day there was no uniform.
Right.
I had spent 8 years, most of my adult life at the time, walking around where my identity was right here, and on my shoulders, right? It was This is who I was. This is what I represented. These are the things that I've done. My identity was all on my chest. And then one day I woke up and it was gone.
Right.
You know,
That's right.
so finding as you work through these things and you know, I am not against medicine. I'm not against mental health. I go to mental health appointments every Friday, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I do it for multiple reasons. One, because it does help me, and two, because I want other people to know that it's okay, right?
Right. That's right.
And so even if I'm doing well and not having any issues, I'll still go because I want to make sure people know that I'm going. And then at the same time, you know, the problem I have is if you today go to the doctor and you say, "Hey, doc, I'm dealing with some anxiety and it's
Right.
getting pretty bad." What is their first step?
They give you a pill.
Right. Fill out this survey or this questionnaire. After you take the questionnaire, oh yeah, you scored really high. You have anxiety. Here, take this pill. Right. And then you come back in 2 weeks and they said, "Hey, how's your anxiety?" "Oh, well, it's still, I can't tell if my anxiety is better. I don't really notice a change, but now I got this weird stomach issue going on too, or like this heartburn." And they're like, "Oh, okay." And then they give you another pill. The next thing you know, you're coming home and there's a brown paper bag on your doorstep that says "To Bry from the doctor." I won't
Right.
go any further.
Yes.
Uh, XOXO, you open it up and there's all these medications. You don't know what you're taking. And the problem is, if you look at a human being as a tree, right? Uh,
Mhm.
and the fruit of that tree is based off of our life experience,
Mhm.
and the fruit will say can also be symptomatic, right? So I go to war, I come home, and now all of a sudden there's anxiety, depression, anger, isolation, uh, insomnia, all these other things that are now on the tree. If I go to a doctor, they're just trying to pluck a symptom off, right? So maybe they'll grab that anxiety and they pull it off and they go, "Hey, how's that feel?" Well, now I've got these other issues because much like when you weed your garden, every time you pluck one, two or three more come up,
That's right.
right?
Yes.
Well, I'm not I by no means have a green thumb. Uh, I can do some pretty cool stuff with wood, but as far as planting it, not my thing, right? But I do know that if you have a tree that's producing negative fruit, pulling the fruit off only does so much. It almost always
Mhm.
points to a root issue
That's right.
because there's characteristics we were born with, right? Things like leadership, wisdom, forgiveness, character, all these things that we're born with that because of our life experience are changed, and when they're changed, the root is changed, and when the root's changed, the fruit changes. The only way to get
Yes.
that fruit back to peace, joy, hope, uh, is to work on the roots. So you can't
Mhm.
do that by just sitting around and talking about your feelings. You have to confront the roots. You have to confront the things like grief, identity, forgiveness, guilt, suicide, depression. Without confronting them, nothing changes.
And I'm assuming, of course, that these are things that you would do through these courses through Reboot Recovery. Is that right?
Correct. So we have a ton of. We used to only have one program. We all started with the Reboot Combat Recovery Group. Now we have Reboot First Responders, which is aimed at the cumulative trauma that first responders face.
Right.
Uh, we have we have a crisis edition. It's a free 5-week crisis edition that started at the beginning of this COVID. Uh, Evan Owens would never say it, but I'll give him a ton of props right here on this podcast.
Mhm.
He wrote, filmed, and did the study guide for this 5-week program in 3 days
Wow.
because he knew it was going to be needed. And so
That's right.
um, we have that one. We're launching Reboot 6 and First Responder 6, which will be a 6-week course mimicking. We have some 2 days, some are virtual, some are not, where we try to pack as much as we can into 2 days. We also have a beta group right now called uh, for general trauma. So things like uh, natural disasters, assault, all those kind of things. That's in the very early stage right now before it goes to a national platform.
One of the questions I've had about how the group operates is I know one of the biggest fears and obstacles that, well, not just veterans or first responders, anyone usually has with going to go get help is the fear that it gets documented, it gets saved as some file somewhere, and the next thing you know, they're
Yeah.
afraid it'll affect promotion, it'll affect how people view you, it'll affect Lord forbid you run for office 20 years later, it comes out like
Yeah.
you're really the psycho killer, but that was like so far in the past or something. Do you all keep that kind of record, or is this a confidential thing? How does that work?
Yeah. So it is completely confidential. The only time, and it depends on location, but like I'll speak real quickly to our military base locations because we have quite a few now.
Hmm.
We operate on post or base, depending on your branch. I don't want to offend anybody, but we operate on post as a nonprofit that is generally sponsored by a chaplain. And so what that means is if we're in group right now and you say that you're going to hurt yourself or your kids or vulnerable population, right? I will pull you aside. We'll have a discussion. I'll contact the chaplain who will then come and talk to you.
Okay.
Other than that, everything that is said in Reboot stays in Reboot. We don't take notes. We don't write stories. We don't keep records of it because that's just not the purpose of us. Um, we're an on ramp or a returning ramp. We're not the expressway. So
Gotcha.
people come to us. We're an on ramp to faith or an on ramp to recovery, and then there's a handoff, and usually that handoff is to local churches or a lot of guys distrust even adult behavioral health on post, and so
Right.
coming through, starting to work through the spiritual stuff and starting to fix those spiritual roots, they're then more comfortable with going and talking to somebody mental health wise. And so, yeah, there's nothing that's said in our group will come back if you make a presidential run.
Sure. And surely there's many aiming to do that right now, right?
I'm sure. I mean, never mind. I'm not going to
Yeah.
say my joke.
There's that comfort of confidentiality and stuff not coming back on you. I mean, of course, if you're a threat to somebody yourself, of
Yeah.
course, action is going to be taken. That's to be understood. But like, if someone just wants to just let out what's in them, they
Yeah.
can have no fear that, going to judge you, going to categorize you, going to
That's right.
give you this pill and diagnose you with something.
We
That's
don't do
not going
it.
to happen.
None of our leaders. Well, that's not true. There's a couple that could diagnose if they wanted, but not in their
Right.
role with Reboot.
Sure. Sure.
And the other thing that makes it different is we're not just for the service member. Now, I use
Right.
service member because that includes active, guard, reserve,
Mm.
veteran, retiree, etc. Right? But we're for the whole family. So a lot of
Okay.
programs, if you and your spouse walked into a group, you would go in one, you would eat together, then you would go in one room, they would go in another. And we understand the concept there. The concept was when you get back into the car, you're going to talk about what just happened in group. In
Right.
reality, veterans don't like to talk. They don't like to
Right.
talk about what happened. They don't want to bring up those things. And so we keep everybody together, and we walk through it together. And it's a beautiful, my wife didn't know anything about my suicide attempt until
Mm.
she moved back down here, went through Reboot with me, and found out during a Reboot group.
Right.
And at the same time, we had never talked about deployment. We had never talked about what had happened. We never talked about things in general. And so as she heard a lot of this stuff, she started to understand why certain things made me react certain ways. And at the same
Yeah.
time, she was able to open up and share at the group. Like, for example, I didn't know that the whole time I was deployed, anytime my wife left the house, she felt guilty
Hmm.
because she knew I was out doing XYZ.
Yes.
And here she is, going to the movies with her sister, feeling guilty because I'm not. Uh,
Right.
and so it really just opened up a whole new level of communication for us.
In addition, this program is provided at no cost. Is that right?
Correct. So no participant has ever been charged to go through any of our courses.
Awesome.
Yeah,
That's
we're funded by some corporate sponsors, uh, some very, very appreciated personal donations, and local grants. And the reason I say local grants is until recently we couldn't take federal grants because faith based.
yeah. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Well, so let's say if I'm listening today and I'm like really hopeful
Yeah.
and I love what I'm hearing and I want to help out some way. I either want to donate or do some kind of volunteer work,
Yeah.
whatever I can dream up to contribute to Reboot Recovery. Where do I start?
Yeah. So you can go right to rebootrecovery.com. There's links how to join a group, how to start a group, how to donate. All that great stuff is right there. Or you can send me an email, bryan@rebootrecovery.com. We'll start a conversation. Even if you just need someone to talk to, uh, feel free to hit me up on email. I typically respond really quick, except for like days like today where I'm kind of running around crazy all day. But
So let's say then I'm a veteran,
yeah,
or I'm currently serving. I'm a first responder, or I'm a spouse or a family member
mhm.
attached through some relationship. Uh, how do they get connected with you all? Is there a hotline number? Do they do this strictly through the internet? How's that work?
Yeah, it's strictly through the internet. Jump on, join a group, or start a group. There's a quick form to fill out. Not very, doesn't ask a ton of questions. It's not like, for your third born, we will, nothing like that. But it's, yeah, it just, and then it sends it to the right person at our staff that will contact you rather quickly, either to help you get enrolled in a group in your area, help you start, to start a group. There is a process with a vetting process and then
Right.
a training and all these different things before a group starts, but it'll connect you with the right person.
And so that I understand and others listening understand, you're talking about doing this all through rebootrecovery.com. Is that right?
Correct.
All right. So if I wanted to start a group, what sort of vetting, credentialing requirements, standards do you have for that to take place?
Yeah. So the vetting process starts with our expansion coordinator. Just a phone call, kind of feeling each other out, asking some questions. I don't know exactly what goes into that. I probably should, but I don't because it's not my lane, which is a terrible mindset, by the way. Not in my lane. Once you leave the military, get rid of that mindset.
Get rid of it.
It will
That's
get you in trouble.
right.
But
But if you're definitely interested, go to rebootrecovery.com.
yeah,
Click on, and I looked at the page quite a few times. It is easy to find what you're looking for. They got a page for it. You click on it. Self-explanatory.
yeah.
If you're looking to start a group or a chapter, whatever they're called, um, there's a process you can fill it in there, and they can get started with that. If you're looking to seek help through rebootrecovery.com, uh, go there. Again, you can find a link. It's easy. Click on it. You can fill in your application. And like you said, they're not going to take a retina scan or blood or kidney for the application.
Yeah.
It'll be a lot easier than the VA's application process, I promise you. And you
I
can.
didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Well, I'm going to say it because
That's
I've
fine.
been through many a process. I saw it on the website. It says we're faith based, but we're not preachy. And like you said yourself, you were an atheist when you went through this program.
Yeah.
Did you feel like this was a grand effort to like make converts and baptize them on the spot, and make it conditional that you have to have faith to attend or anything like that?
No, so I'll speak to this from both angles real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So as a participant, we're very open in the very first week. Hey, we are faith based. We are going to teach out of the Bible, just so you know.
Right.
But the second week, the leader said, "All right, everybody knows the story of David and Goliath." And I looked around, and everybody else's heads are shaking up and down. I had no idea what he was talking about.
Right.
None.
Right.
Imagine my surprise the next week when he's talking about King David, and I find out it's the same kid. You know.
Yes.
Um, but it's the goal. I've been very blessed as a leader where I've had um, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, Mormon, Hindu, pagan
Mhm.
come through our group, and the goal is never conversion, right?
Right.
The goal is teaching biblical truths, right?
Mhm.
And I had one gentleman, he might have been Wiccan. He very early on, he was like, "If you're not going to try to make me into a Christian, why do you use the Bible?"
Mhm.
And I said, "Well, first off, there's a ton of great truths in the Bible, whether you believe it or not. Second off, let me ask you a question. When do you believe the Bible was written?" And he was like, "Well, I believe it was written in 200 AD." And I went, "Okay. Well, even if that's true, you're telling me that this thing has lasted 1900 years. So you just told me that you were depressed and that you feel a depression like nobody has ever felt before. Come here, let's read this together." Right?
Right.
So then you turn to, Job or Elijah or
Mhm.
or one of these stories, and you're like, even if you don't believe this is true, this was written long before you were thought of. You're not the only person that feels that way. You know, and being able to share these stories. I mean, although it's never the goal, if it happens, I'm not mad either. you know,
Right.
uh,
That's right.
uh,
Yeah.
I always joke that I'm not going to hit somebody over there with a Bible. And as an atheist, a former atheist, I remember the questions, and I remember, that feeling of hopelessness and always feeling like something was missing. And
Yes.
so, and I understand that it's not an ignorance thing, like many people believe. Sometimes it's an environment thing.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's an experience thing. Maybe you know they told you they're atheist, and if you sat down and actually just had a cup of coffee with them, you'd find out that they were at one point a member of the church with family members that were deacons or elders
Mhm.
or whatever, and then something happened in the church and they were hurt.
Right.
You know,
Right.
because we forget often that anything that man's involved with is going to be flawed.
Brian, it's really been a pleasure having you on this show. And on behalf of Reboot Recovery, whom you represent,
Yes, sir.
I appreciate the work that is being done. It's being provided for free. It's taken care of funding wise. But for those of you who are listening, and this really speaks to you, go to rebootrecovery.com, and there's a donate page. You can click there. You can also start fundraisers to raise money for Reboot Recovery. There's other ways in which you can get involved in certain ways if that appeals to you as well. If this is an issue that speaks to you, go to rebootrecovery.com and see what's there. And especially if you're a veteran, or currently serving service member or a first responder, or you are related or married, even if they're just your neighbor, and you need that help, it's just a click away. Rebootrecovery.com, click on it, go through the process. It won't take long, and they will start making things happen to where we can prevent another loss of life. Brian, again, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's time now to talk about the question of the week. Each week, I give a question for the week that is to be discussed on Twitter or on Facebook. And the discussions will be looked at throughout the week. And what will happen is, following week during the show, when we look at the question of the week, some comments will be brought up that have been left by those who are in the discussion. Last week's question of the week was, is free speech worth fighting for? And I would like to bring up an answer that a Randall Barker had brought up on our Facebook page called Rage of the Age. And his response was, for most people, it depends on who is speaking. I think that is a very accurate statement and speaks to the truth of how the issue of free speech works. When it's your people, the cry is free speech, don't suppress it. But if it's someone else and you don't like their speech, often there's an underhanded means to try to silence that person. Thank you for that comment, Randall. Now I want to bring up this week's question of the week as it relates to the topic that we have discussed today so far on this podcast program. The question of the week is, do you know a veteran who has taken their own life? I'm going to post that question on Facebook on our Rage of the Age page. I will post also that question with the Rage of the Age Now on the Twitter account, and you can answer on any social platform that you choose. The question will be presented just as I'm asking it to you now. Do you know a veteran who has taken their own life? Respond to that question, and I will bring up some of the responses in next week's episode.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
This topic of veteran suicide really hits close to home for me because I have known many who have taken their own life, more than I have known who have perished while on deployment overseas. I still think about it often and how sad it very seems that they have taken their life having been through so much and come through it, yet to feel so hopeless that they feel they must take their lives. It is something that hits us very hard when the news comes out, and many of us are still in touch with each other, and this continues to plague us, haunt us. It frightens us in many ways. We're constantly reaching out to others saying, hey, if you need something, please contact us and we will do what we can for you. And yet it seems that the rate continues on to where many feel there's no hope but to take their life. I wanted to have this on this segment today because I want to first off appeal to every veteran who will hear this, that there is hope and that you should contact someone to start reaching that hope right now, because there are many out there who love you and care for you, and they are rooting for you. They are on your side, and you do not have to go through this alone. But in this essay segment, I want to address two primary views which tend to surround the view of the veteran in our day. The first view is the primary view, where veterans are often viewed as people with trauma. They're damaged goods, and they're nothing but a ticking time bomb. They're often presented as brutalized animals or robots mindlessly obeying orders. They're shown as being incapable of living normal lives, that the only way of coping for them is often presented as that being done through the taking of pills and constant hours of counseling to apparently deal with the anger that we have inside. There's another idea that your best days are behind you and you will never be what you were once in the military. And that usually comes from the veteran themselves. But on the other end, I want to look at another view. A view that veterans, believe it or not, are people just like everybody else. They have endured traumatic events, some of them, just as much as anyone else may endure a traumatic event. Maybe of a different nature, maybe even of a similar nature. It is also a view that looks at veterans not as objects to be pitied, but they are human beings who are made in the image of God. That they are capable of, quote unquote, normal life. They can cope beyond a session and a bottle of pills. And that your best days are yet ahead of you. When I look at the first view that is presented, it is the most common. It is the overwhelming presentation, which is controlled by those who like to control the narrative. We talked about this in the last episode about free speech, where we don't present information and discuss it. We basically categorize and present only what we want heard and suppress otherwise. And when you consider that most of the press is controlled by these conglomerate news agencies, and there's only a very few of them, and they all sound the same. If you notice, they almost sound the same to the exact wording, the way they speak things, the way that the headlines run, the talking points are the same. It makes you wonder, is there just one writer and everyone else just repeats what they're told? Because that's really what it sounds like. And what does that narrative look like today for many of our veterans? Well, if you look at most TV shows and movies that have veterans in them, they will often be portrayed as a character who is the troubled vet. Oftentimes they're a main character, sometimes a side character, and there's times where even they have played a villain. If you look at those veterans that are now in those shows that you find on TV or on Netflix or Hulu or in the cinemas, whether it be a show or a movie, I challenge you, look at when they have veterans play any roles, when there's a character that is playing a veteran, most often, if not always, they will present that person as a troubled soul who's trying to just cope with life. And this stereotype is constantly repeated over and over again. If you look at the headlines that are in the news, oftentimes it's as if they delight in demonstrating that veterans are apparently unable to cope with anything. This is because many who control those narratives come from a background where they view the military with suspicion and even as an adversary to their political goals. They have a huge dislike, many of them being on the left, for the military as it is right now. And they take great delight in making it look as ugly as possible. And one of the ways in which that is done is to ramp up those who are having trouble and attributing that to the entire force as if all it does is make everyone broken and destroyed people who are incapable of doing anything. But I challenge that view, that even though they want to make you feel hopeless, there is hope. I personally have known many veterans who've been through quite a bit of nasty things, who have started their own businesses. I have known veterans who have entered into the field of teaching. I have known many who have entered into higher education, who are getting degrees left and right, who are performing very well in their classes. There are many who have even entered into political office and are serving at local, state, and national levels. And these are all former veterans who have put themselves on the line many a time, and they are not the typical demonstration of that broken person incapable of living life. The thing I want to say today is, first off, to the veterans, because you tell this to yourself often enough. You have this idea that your best days are behind you. But I want to tell you, they're not. Your country needs you now more than ever. We need people with your work ethic. We need people with your tenacity. We need those who have been through things and back and can still stand their ground and get things done, our country still needs you. We need you to teach our children. We need you to start businesses. We need you in higher learning to challenge the one-minded narrative that they present. We definitely need you in political office to shake up things a bit and to get some attention to things and to call out the shenanigans when you see it. You have a life that are ahead of you. There are many, many examples of veterans who have exited the service, who have lived full lives with families, have prospered in their ways, have accomplished many of things outside the service, and that is available to all of us. Because again, we are all human beings made in the image of God, not brutalized animals and automatons, just trying to get by in life. That being said, though, there are many who are traumatized, who have been through some things, who have injuries, and they have wounds that affect the mind and the soul as well as their bodies. And I want to tell you, it's not hopeless for you either. I often marvel at how we present the veteran as opposed to anybody else. Because if someone endured a traumatic event, a civilian gets hit in a car or suffers a brutal crime or comes across somebody that they love who has died, we wouldn't ever dream of going, oh, they're damaged goods and they're just a ticking time bomb. There would be a compassion to want to help them. And we should have the same thing in regards to the view of who the veteran is. I am glad that I had this interview this week with Reboot Recovery. I love their approach because it's not a here's your pill, get out of my office approach that many of you have been through. They want to get to the heart of the matter, to the root. They want to get to your mind and to your soul. They want to bring you a sense of hope that oftentimes seems elusive through other means. If that won't work for you, then I encourage you to seek it elsewhere, to look where you can get that help. You can do it. There is hope for you. There is no need to take your life because you will be missed. It will cause sorrow when you are gone. There are many who still love you, and we want the best for you. For those of you who are in need, whether you be a veteran or a first responder, or even if you're not any of those, but you were thinking of taking your life today, I want to encourage you that even though that is weighing heavy on your mind, and you feel like you've come by it honestly, there is a way out. And you can take those steps today. And I encourage you to do so.
You've been listening to Rage of the Age. If you loved today's podcast, make sure to leave a review on the media you're listening through. Secure future episodes by heading over to rageoftheage.com and clicking the RSS feed button. Until next time, this has been Rage of the Age.